So we find ourselves on our journey around the sun on spaceship Earth, returning again to that point where the Gemini new moon appears, appropriately enough, in Gemini season. And we ask ourselves, with all the world's horrors and insanity, do we renounce everything or return to the dance of reality as the only way in is to go through? And it seems appropriate to try another collective reading another book from Michael Bentine, Doors of the Mind. His further thoughts on the paranormal and all human subtle energies. We try to find a path back to healing. And here is a chapter in this book where he explores some of these ideas. And it's interesting to read in a book like this, which is over 40 years old. This first published in 1984 by Granada. And we seek some wisdom from the life experience of those who have lived. Because the path of enlightenment may be to be totally passive in discovering the non-dualistic state of reality. But perhaps true healing can only be accomplished by learning how to swim. So let us open one of these doors. The door to healing. Healing is total communication, the transference of energy from one person to another. I have seen transference of such energies used to help a dying person pass through the portals of death peacefully, or to enable someone in pain to withstand the assault of suffering. To watch such a phenomenon is a wonderful experience, and the feeling of having shared in something natural and spiritual is deeply rewarding. And perhaps the most suffering that occurs at the end of life is because of the body's desire to grip on, and people struggle to let go as the soul is wrenched from the heart, while something much more peaceful can be accomplished by letting go and floating out the top of your head without waiting for all the body's organs to fail. But as we are still in the game, we don't need to dwell on that just yet. It's just always good to be aware of what unfolds for all of us. Let us continue. The person receiving the energy doesn't necessarily have to believe in the existence of these forces, but the person who is acting as the channel for these energies must know about them and understand exactly what he or she is doing. Conversely, many of you will have experienced the almost vampiric draining of your life energy that can occur when you are in the proximity of an extremely negative person. If you become conscious of this phenomenon occurring, sometimes with a person who is quite unaware of the drawing of power that he or she is causing, you should close the circuits of your body by crossing your arms and legs, thereby shutting off the outward flow of your energy. As I have already pointed out, in Soviet Russia, it is considered unwise to perform major surgical operations during the early hours of the morning. It is also considered very unhealthy by the Soviet medical services to allow a small child to sleep in the same bed or room as an old person, such as the grandmother or great aunt. This is not a direct result of the hag-ridden, superstitious outlook of the country folk of Russia's vast territories, where shamanism is still widely practiced, but is a well-founded medical and surgical precaution against the loss of vital force from patients. Then one has to wonder what happens to patients who are on an open ward, listening to the screams and distress of the elderly dying while you await your appendix being removed. Without doubt, what we have in the West in the allopathic medical system is casual cruelty. Let us continue. The life force in mankind is a very real factor in the survival of the race. And many times during wartime, I have seen terribly wounded people survive when others with far lighter injuries, but who were low in their vital life force, failed to pull through. In 1980, I became involved in what several qualified psychiatrists seriously consider to have been a case of modern vampirism. Not in the sense of actual blood-sucking, but in the deliberate drawing of the vital energies from an unsuspecting victim. This is by no means as rare an occurrence as one would suppose, and my friend and colleague Dr. Stanley Rose of Birmingham has confirmed the acknowledged existence of this strange and frightening phenomenon. And one could probably add that in any group of perhaps 5 to 10 friends, or in any family grouping, inevitably one of those people will be consciously or unconsciously an energy vampire. Anyway, the case that I was involved with started with an urgent phone call from a close friend of mine, Colin Bloy, who was in the south of France. He enlisted my help for a transference of healing energy which was desperately needed by Miss J, the wife of one of his friends. Both Colin and I were part of a small group of positive people who were able to link up with each other and, by using the power of our wills, apparently transfer energy to someone in need. This is virtually what the contemplative monastic orders do as a matter of daily routine. But in my own case, it was a part-time emergency occupation, something like Pop's healing circle in the 30s. From 1934 onwards, my father concentrated in a special room upstairs for 20 minutes absent healing at 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock every night of the year. It was a simple act of self-sacrifice that was typical of my father, but naturally it affected my mother's social life. It says a lot for Ma that she never complained and would often join him. When they lived in London in this humane occupation, the results were most encouraging, and the improved health and well-being of the people receiving this energy transmission were far beyond the possibilities of coincidence. 3 of us, with the additional help of my youngest daughter, were involved in the transmission of positive thought to Miss J, our silent prayer, whichever way you wish to think of it. And after the transmission was over, my daughter, who had been in a light trance, vividly described a scene that was later confirmed in every detail. What she saw clairvoyantly was a semi-underground room set with devil masks and equipped with a stone table or altar, with one side of the room flanked by large windows opening out onto a garden. When Colin returned from France, he was amazed at the accuracy of my daughter's description of that strange room. Colin's story was extraordinary. He had gone to the south of France to visit Mr. J, a business partner with whom he had been associated for some years. They were close friends, as were their families, so Colin was horrified to find that his partner was deeply concerned about the condition of his wife, who had been gravely ill for several months. Colin was even more upset when he went upstairs to find Miss J lying in bed and suffering from some sort of wasting disease which had reduced her normally robust body to a frail shadow of her usual self. Mr. J had to leave for a short business trip to Switzerland and left Colin in charge of the house, which was a lovely villa, ideally situated near Nice. Colin, who was a very experienced dowser, picked up a strong line of force which seemed to emanate from Miss J's bed and to continue outwards through the wall of her room. He followed the line of energy out of the house and across the extensive gardens, where it finally disappeared under a boundary wall, apparently in the direction of a neighbouring house. Colin told me that the next day he talked to his friend's daughter, who had returned home late the previous night. When Colin told her about the line of force coming from her mother's bed, she didn't seem very surprised. She explained that the neighbours had been friends of her parents, but they had indulged themselves in strange practices. Apparently they would occasionally act as hosts to large numbers of boys and girls, uniformly dressed in white, who arrived in busloads from the surrounding countryside. Her family had never been invited to these gatherings, but were naturally very intrigued by these odd proceedings. Colin also ascertained from the daughter that her mother had had a blazing row, as the girl described it, with the next door neighbours, and that the neighbour's wife had left, apparently after cursing her. It all sounds ridiculous, but the results, coincidental or not, had been anything but funny. Miss J, shortly after the incident, had been forced to take to her bed and not left it since. The following day, before he phoned me, Colin had also traced the line of force across the intervening garden wall and had, accompanied by the daughter, who was still a persona grata with the neighbouring family, he had paid a visit to the other villa. This was a charming old French farmhouse, which had been built on the site of a Templar farm. The word farm originates from the firm or closed area originally conceived by the Templars to protect their livestock. One of the many Templar sites in the area. Such a site, originally built by the Knights of the Temple, would be charged with the residual power of these powerful magicians. Colin detected these emanations radiating from the stately farm. When they knocked, the front door was opened by the manservant who ushered them inside, albeit a little reluctantly, probably because Colin was a stranger, but accepted the explanation from his neighbour's daughter that the Englishman was a great admirer of French architecture of the Templar period. Colin was even allowed to make a cursory inspection of the premises, and while the butler went to fetch them some lemonade, Colin quickly detected the path of the line of force and followed it to a door in the hall. On impulse, he opened it and found some stone steps leading down to a cellar-like room. Again, acting on the spur of the moment, Colin descended the steps to find himself in a semi-underground room. The room was flanked by windows which opened out onto the garden, but the room itself was below the main building of the farmhouse. The walls were of stone, as was the floor, and a stone table formed a kind of altar at one end, while the walls were decorated with devil masks such as witch doctors wear when practicing their rituals. Colin hurriedly returned to the drawing room, where drinks were being served by the manservant, who had noticed Colin leaving the underground room. The man became agitated and eventually angry, even though he had previously given Colin permission to look around the house. He told my friend that he had no right to go down into the discotheque, as he described the subterranean room, without further permission. And after Colin and the girl had gulped down their drinks, he showed them abruptly out of the house. Colin was now certain that power was being deliberately drawn from Miss J, causing her to waste away. And when Mr. J returned from Switzerland, Colin, who had often discussed dowsing and the paranormal with his skeptical friend, told him about his suspicions. At first, Mr. J resisted the suggestion of paranormal phenomena, but he was visibly shaken by Colin's explanation, and because of his friendship and personal regard for Colin's abilities, he agreed to go along with whatever course of action his friend had in mind to help his ailing wife. After the healing transmission, Colin went upstairs to talk to the recipient of the energy, and to his utter amazement, the frail and exhausted woman physically attacked him, pouring violent curses on him, as though she was acting as a channel for some alien demonic entity. Colin, who was built like the rugged player he was, had to use every ounce of his physical strength to restrain the poor woman, until suddenly she collapsed back onto the bed and immediately fell into a deep healing sleep. Which sort of makes you think of the work of Jerry Marzinski. Should continue. The next morning, to everyone's amazement and delight, she came downstairs, helped by her daughter, and ate a hearty breakfast. From then on, the improvement in her health was quite miraculous. And when I met them some months later, this cheerful family was back to normal, with Miss J vibrant with health and energy, and with an excellent appetite to match. The sequel to this strange story is equally odd. Colin told me that the manservant and wife of the neighbour were now both looking unwell and had visibly aged, presumably when their source of energy had been cut off. I'll also add that in the endless suburban sprawl of bland people living bland consumer lives, you will find that there are those homes, those innocuous looking homes you can enter in suburbia and find floor to ceiling skull wallpaper and skull lights, and the intonation of arcane and archaic rituals. In other words, these people share the world with us, and one can't defend oneself against such creatures unless one is even aware they exist. Back to the book. Whether this story is the product of a number of otherwise intelligent people's self-delusion, or whether it is a brief recital of some strange phenomena, is entirely up to the individual who assesses it. However, certain facts are undeniable. Miss J had been desperately ill, and the doctors, a number of specialists among them, could find no physical cause for her alarming condition. The healing transmission seemed to help Miss J to turn the corner, and certainly convinced Mr. J that Colin had been right. Dr. Rose, who acts as a devil's advocate for me on questions of psychology, amazed me when I rather sheepishly related this story by accepting it as yet another example of what he referred to as psychic vampirism. He told me about similar cases that he had experience or knowledge of, and the phenomenon was also confirmed by Dr. Rose's colleague, another good friend, Dr. Brian Houghton. a clinical psychiatrist who has a deep scholarly interest in the paranormal. His concise explanation was something like this. The negative drawing of energy has probably been experienced by everybody at some time in their lives. Expressions like these are common. I felt completely drained after she'd left. Or, those people absolutely drain one. And, I don't like going there. I feel so exhausted by the place. I know certain places like that and avoid them whenever possible. I also have had energy taken from me quite often until I have become conscious of it and have shut myself off from the source of the negative draining. Most of it is done quite unconsciously by the people involved, but occasionally I have picked up a deliberate attempt to steal my vital force from me, and then I know that I am dealing with someone who is being consciously negative or even downright evil. This would lead me to believe that the person concerned was likely to be involved with ritual practices of a dark nature, and it's a sort of feeling that warned me of Stephen Ward's entanglement with black magic. I have also met a number of people considered by the establishment to be very important persons who gave me the same sinister feeling. These people were in positions of power and were of all shades of political opinion. In each case, the aura of disquiet and unease quickly conveyed to me that they were involved in very negative undertakings. There is an enormous difference between the auras of persons practicing the opposing rituals of white and black magic, though of course at times an aura of grey energies tends to form a link between them. And I would add that some of these people emanate such a deep, dark blackness in their corrupted soul that it manages to even emanate through the television screen when one looks at the current crop of political leaders, particularly those in Western Europe. Let us continue. In my father's case, the practice of healing was never undertaken without the knowledge and cooperation of a person's physician. However, unlike some healers, Pop never referred to people who came to him for help as patients. That term is for qualified physicians to use, and as far as I am concerned, these unfortunate people need some moral encouragement or assistance with their problems, and I pray that I may be able to help them. My father certainly did that with most of the troubled people who came to see him. Whether their condition of distress was mental or physical, Pop seemed to be able to help many of these people, among whom were doctors and surgeons, scientists, actors and actresses, musical artistes, writers and musicians, and people from every walk of life, many of them coming from distant parts of the world to seek his help. My father, being a wise man, never let this turn his head, and he certainly didn't suffer from megalomania, which is often the case with healers and psychics. During the years which I was able to assist Pop as an energy source, I saw him help people who suffered from many different kinds of debilitating conditions. He aided cases of hypertension, arthritis, eczema, anorexia, migraine, hysteria, alcoholism, impaired hearing, acute depression, even insanity, and many other types of nervous illnesses. From these experiences of the healing process, it emerged that a soothing approach to someone's problems can be of great benefit in some cases, whereas in others, an enlivening transference of vital energy is needed. Today, the medical profession in many countries agree that the morale factor is a vital ingredient in the recovery process, and many cases of spontaneous remission in cancer can be traced to a change of mental attitude in the patients concerned. Pop was particularly impressed by W.J. Kilner's book, The Aura, Originally published as The Human Atmosphere, Kegan Paul, London, 1920, reissued by University Books, New York, 1965. A scholarly work by a highly qualified medical practitioner who was also a pioneer of radiology. Dr. Kilner's account of his researches into the existence of different body emanations was based on years of close observation of these auras, which can become visible to the human eye when viewed through the doctor's invention, a screen of optical quality glass on which diasin, a coal tar dye, has been painted. This simple device apparently enables the eye to perceive deeply into the ultraviolet range of the light spectrum. It also appears that many electrochemical emanations of the human body are conversely in the range of extremely low frequencies, and the use of electroencephalograph seems to bear out this supposition. And what is left out of modern allopathic medicine is the extent to which human beings are electric and what the possible effects of all the electricity and radiation of our technological civilization is upon the body's natural system, something that we will not even consider for the sake of the convenience of our smartphones and everything else. Anyway, I have been taken to task for daring to make statements like this when I have no scientific qualifications. Neither I, it might point out, have most of the critics involved. And I only make such a statement after consulting scientists and medical practitioners who themselves are fully qualified to judge such possibilities. They all agree that there are such emanations from the human body during life and that these cease after death, i.e. when the normal electrochemical processes of a living being have ceased to function. Therefore, the putrefying emanations from the chemical degeneration of a corpse can hardly be mistaken for the vibrant, vital energies emanating from the body of a living person or other animal. One would have thought that such a statement would be obviously factual. However, most of his contemporaries roundly condemned Dr. Kilner's work as superficial, inconclusive, and even as downright charlatanry. As I've said before, the establishment often ridicules the work of pioneers until it is safe to accept it, and then cashes in on such work, usually after the pioneer is conveniently dead. Genuine healing is as much an art as is the rest of the practice of conventional medicine. And today, many medical practitioners are more open-minded towards unconventional fringe medicine. In my lifetime, osteopathy, homeopathy, chiropractic, acupuncture, and hypnotism have all been absorbed into the general art and practice of medicine, and mankind has generally benefited. And as this was written in 1984, one can judge for oneself how far forward or backwards we have gone in the last 40 years. Continue. Sadly, there are still many charlatans practicing in these areas, and therefore the principle of caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, is a wise precaution when approaching any of these practitioners. An experienced orthodox physician will sometimes have no objection to his patient benefiting from such practices, so long as he is kept informed of the course of such treatments and knows the healer personally. An area of healing that I feel is very important is that used in dealing with grief, especially in mourning. Many people who have suffered tragically from the sudden loss of someone whom they loved very much have written to me after reading The Door Marked Summer, asking for help. I can only advise them in the terms of my own experiences. A long illness somehow prepares you for the death of someone you love, whereas nothing mitigates the initial shock of learning that someone you love has been killed or has died suddenly. Both my father and my mother were ill before they died, whereas my cousin John, of whom I was very fond, was killed during the war, and his death came as a bitter blow. The circumstances of our son Gus's death at the age of 21 were particularly devastating. When he failed to return home for 48 hours, I rang round various places where he might have been. He always considerately told us where he was and when he expected to come back, so that his silence immediately gave us cause for alarm. I knew when the assistant instructor at Lasham Airfield came to the phone that Gus had died, even though that confused young man was unable to confirm that Gus had been there. He seemed to have no idea what had happened to the club's aircraft either. A heart-sickening period of over 9 weeks passed between the light plane on a local flight being presumed to be missing and the day when Gus and his friend Andrew were found dead in a wood near Petersfield, a bare 15 minutes flying time from Lasham Airfield. The crashed plane was found intact by a horrified young couple out for a stroll in the woods. I feel particularly bitter about the laxity of private flying at the time. In the RAF, we started looking for an aircraft as soon as the estimated time of flying capability of the particular aircraft had been exceeded. In other words, the search started when the petrol would have run out. In the case of Gus and Andy's aircraft, which was a club machine, it was 48 hours before it had finally dawned on someone that the aircraft was missing. That is how appallingly lax the system of private flying had become. In addition to the misery caused by the loss of our son and his friend, there was the endless persecution by some of the more unsavoury members of the press, which became a further intrusion into our private grief. Add to that fact that I had to continue to earn my living as a comedian and comedy scriptwriter, and you will understand why the whole situation was such a nightmare for all of us. In my own case, only by hanging on grimly to the convictions of my youth, by thinking positively, by submerging my own personal grief, and by externalizing my energies towards comforting the others, was I able to sublimate most of the misery and continue to work hard and financially successfully. At the same time, I was conducting intensive research into the whole dreadful affair, besides fighting a public campaign for improved safety in private flying. For me, and I hope my family, the attitude of positive thinking we adopted helped to assuage the grief and at least enabled me to do something constructive towards preventing more misery to others by applying the lessons learned from the accident. It wasn't easy, but the longer a person allows grief and self-pity to cloud the experience of life, the more negative tragedy becomes. The healing factor is simply the application of positive thinking and a selfless concern for others who are also suffering. Here are a few simple rules that may help. First, don't be alarmed by the sheer intensity of your grief. Keeping a stiff upper lip may be necessary to help others, but in private, let your misery flood out with your tears. Weeping is nature's way of dealing with severe shock and distress. Don't be ashamed of crying. Secondly, break the cycle of negative thinking, such as dwelling on the horror of a car or aircraft crash, motorcycle accident, terminal illness, heart attack, or whatever has caused the tragedy, and try to blot the shocking facts, real or imaginary, out of your mind, which will be reeling from the news of the disaster. Remember that the actual death experience was most probably not felt by the victim of the accident or illness. Guilt, often unjustifiably, may be felt after the death of a loved person. Such questions as, did I do everything I could to prevent it happening? Or suppose I had been more understanding? And even, if only I had been there at the time, are all profitless, so banish them and get on with living. Your only duty to the dead is to inter or cremate their physical remains and then to cherish the happiest and most loving memories of their lives, not their deaths. Your earthly duty is to help the living. Thirdly, externalize your energies as much as possible with children and elderly folk who need the warmth and comfort of companionship, and with animals. Never let others, of whom there will be a surprising number, ghoulishly feed off your sorrow. You would be amazed if I told you how many people came expressly to enjoy the grief experience with my family, and with me in particular. For every stranger who genuinely tried to express sympathy for our suffering, there were plenty more who came up to me with a dark cloud almost visible around them. These ghouls were among the worst part of that whole grisly experience. A better part was when Gus appeared to me in our sunny garden in Surrey. He touched me lightly and spoke to me, and then, like a summer breeze, was gone. It was his way of saying goodbye, or as I think of it, au revoir. For the next time he comes to me so clearly, I know I will join him on his return journey. That is how greatly healing has helped me, and I pray that it helps you as much in your hour of need or grief. From my own experience, I found that one of the great healing factors is laughter, and recent medical research has reached the same conclusion. As I have stated before, evil is negative thinking and does not like positive laughter, by which I mean good, healthy, hearty laughter, not snide sniggers at someone else's misfortunes. I spent 2 years on the production of The Golden Silence, which was the fond and detailed presentation of the best moments from the great comedy films of the silent era. The series was shown almost worldwide, and the silent comedy appealed to everyone irrespective of age, race, culture, or religion. I feel that I haven't entirely wasted my life by being a comedian and a comedy writer, though I have often failed in both capacities, because I've been able to make people laugh. I believe that The Goon Show, It's a Square World, The Bumbleys, and Potty Time have all contributed to the cause of good, gutsy laughter, and by the number of sick people who have told me that they have been helped by these pieces of comedy. I know that some of my life has been worthwhile. I truly believe that laughter is a great healer. And isn't that the truth? For the first time in my life during the Sniffles scamdemic, I watched all the Laurel and Hardy films about 3 times and somehow preserved my sanity. When one finds oneself watching 24/7 news to see what the latest updates on the war on humanity is, you realize you are doing nothing but gazing into the abyss, and the abyss is gazing into you. To laugh is to be spontaneously surprised by the novelty of ingenious creativity, and we ask, are our lives just a comedy or tragedy? But to be a part of this dance of reality, to join in co-creating creation, means to preserve our ability to laugh and know ourselves as wounded healers